Hey Tristine, sorry, I just went to a gig and I'm a little rusty, musty, so forgive me if I'm a bit loud or whatever. But I thought I'd give you a little rundown on the things that I learned in Education 141. Whether or not you take this course, I think it's cool to learn, and I think you are a very keen learner, so I think it'd be awesome to share with you. A lot of the things, I'll keep it brief, I don't want to like overload like a video to be 10 minutes long or something, or 20 minutes long. So I'll just cover over the basics. So the things that I learned in this were specifically to do with lifespan and like how, like different parts, or like how we, you know, define different parts of a growing body, right? So, the first one is a lifespan perspective, which suggests, there's 10 different stages: prenatal, infancy, toddlerhood, blah, 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 blah. Eventually, and eventually you get to late adulthood. Basically, you keep dividing every single age group until, you find like what you think is like completely defined of that group, you know what I mean? And so basically, we looked at how development is affected in education. We look at different perspectives of it. Like adversity was a very big one. So adversity means like it's basically another word for trauma. And a really good story in this lecture was talking about the gondola story. And the gondola story, you can have a read of it here. Basically, it showed that after children witnessed a brutal accident, like like a guy, this like a ski instructor got like killed in a horrific accident. But from that, the research showed that instead of sending them, immediately home, to their families where they could, immediately reconcile those memories and go like, fuck, 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 I just saw someone die, instead they made them watch Frozen and they gave them a shitload of popcorn. And then, like 10 years later, when they're looking back at the events, they were like, oh man, that day was awesome. I think someone died though. Oh well. Frozen was cool, you know what I mean? Like basically they got to, you know, maintain a healthy mindset and not obtain any trauma from that accident, because like seeing someone die could be very traumatic, so you could get problems like PTSD, anxiety, whatever stuff from that sort of event. And I think it's, like this was one of the most important things that I learned from this. But adversity is also not all negative, right? So you can get post traumatic growth right here, So, like, like the phrase, pain builds character, you basically suffering builds character sort of thing, right? So people who have lost their friends, to suicide, have a better understanding of mental health, they're more empathetic or whatnot, maybe victims of abuse, more, sort of aware of boundaries, whether that's sexual or whatnot, you know what I mean? And basically, Education 101 looked to, like explain all of it, and I thought it was really interesting. Another big thing is spiritual development, and this was a very interesting one for me because I'm not very like spiritual or anything. I'm not into like star signs or whatnot, nor am I really religious, but I also think that spiritualness is really important, because like in the end, inevitably that's where we get our morals from, like I don't think we'd probably have a concept of evil had it not been for early Christianity and, other religions who sought to justify other things by calling them evil, despite the fact that, like, you know, the early incarnations of evil weren't, that pleasant, because I'd say, shit like, oh, being gay is evil, right? But, it's kind of trickled down into this aspect of now we understand that evil is a concept, right? Like, there are evil people in quotation marks, or not really evil people, evil actions to be done by people, right? And the reason why I think that spiritual development is really important is because it builds a foundation for our morals, Like, I was raised very atheist actually, but I was raised in a very Catholic sort of affected environment, right? Because I grew up in Italy for the first 7 years of my life. My grandmother is very Catholic, or not very Catholic. I think she's like kind of atheist, but she was grown up very Catholic, and she kind of still has that residue, and she still holds, some of the values. Um, Even I was named after San Antonio, who's a saint, or Saint Antonio, or San Antonio, who was a saint, who was like a doctor, something like that. And he was like basically memorialized as a religious figure in Italy. And what's it called? From that environment, I kind of built up, like kind of the best of both worlds, right? Despite the fact that like I was brought up in a pretty kind of religious environment, more like a religious, like world, because Italy's very Catholic, so like don't kill people. That was a big one, right? I remember actually at my primary school they used to have like these sort of debriefings on what happens when you die. And for a long time I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna see a movie when we die. Um, but what's it called? Yeah, so but also the atheist part kind of said like, yeah, evil and good is kind of a good concept, but also gay people aren't evil. And neither are people who are in wheelchairs or whatever. So I got to have that privilege growing up, which was really cool. And obviously spiritual development in what's it called, Maori culture is very important, and I think I might share with you a specific document with that, which is, I'm not sure if it's here, but basically it's that, there's four different kinds of things. I think it's tied a lot to mana. It's very interesting. I might revisit it. I think it's really cool. And maybe finally to conclude, while I cycle through this, we also do look at Freud, and I'm sure you know that Freud is a fucking weirdo. Um, but he did develop the early ideas for ego and stuff like that. So what he would do is he said like, okay, everyone has ego and it needs to grow from that, right? But like it's funny because the ego we know is actually super ego, like when it gets really bad, sort of thing. But what's it called? Like on his more main, like tame theories, he would say like, yeah, everyone has an ego and they have to, grow it out. And he believed that if you had like a problem, like a traumatic accident, you had to fix that problem or else you wouldn't grow, right? Which it can be seen in things, but I like to believe more that you end up growing around it, sort of thing. Like I don't know, if you've been mentally abused, right? That doesn't mean you stop growing if you haven't, found healthier coping mechanisms. It just means that you've grown around coping mechanisms that aren't necessarily the best, you know? But yeah, it's not all mental stuff. There's a lot of physical stuff as well. So looking here, we look at the gross and the fine motor skills. And what I like about a lot about it is that we define the gross motor skills as like, these big like big movements, right? Like, like crawling or balancing. It's just gross, is basically just the massive run. And then the fine one is, stuff like pencils and like drawing and stuff like that. We learned that, babies have develop the grass reflexes. It's, I don't know. It's really interesting, and yeah. Actually, it was actually funny. One more thing is that my lecturer specifically said, "Yeah, we don't know what fucking SIDS is, and now we know what SIDS is." I think what it is I think it's something to do with like gravity actually, and like the where babies is sleeping sort of thing. SIDS, sorry, if you don't know what SIDS is, it's sudden infant death syndrome, which is like really anxiety inducing for a lot of people. It's like, holy fuck, my baby just could randomly die. And I think what happened is that it was specifically sleeping positions that caused it. But I don't know. If anything interests you here, I'll show you the document. And yeah, I hope you're having a really good day, and I hope you're not too sick. And yeah, this video will always be up, so feel free to watch it whenever you want. Bye.